Welcome to the Stepping Up Leadership module. I'm Professor Christine Bamford and I'm the Chief Executive of Stepping Up Learning Academy. And we're starting by looking at the journey to becoming an inclusive leader. And what we're doing is going to share with you, first of all, what is the difference between leadership and management? Or what is it anyhow, as I would say? And the sort of research that comes through talks about leadership is centred on a vision to guide change, thinking, set direction, capitalising on opportunities, growth. Whereas management focuses on the day-to-day priorities, budgeting, organising, structuring, project management, staffing, to achieve those organisational goals. So they're talking about leaders being able to guide and influence people, while managers control and keep employees and staff on track. Now, in my view, you need to really be both a manager and a leader. So flatten hierarchies, diversity of thought, motivation, driving change, economic and environmental pressures, in my view, means that all leaders are also managers, and all managers are also leaders. And here I'm going to just quote from Richard Boyatzis, who was one of the original founders, along with Daniel Goldberg, on emotional intelligence. And he says, there are many leaders, not just one. Leadership is distributed. It resides not solely in the individual at the top, but in every person, at every level, who, in one way or another, acts as a leader to a group of followers. Wherever in the organisation that person is, whether it's shop steward, team head, or chief executive, it is a distributed task amongst those. And I think that just sort of sums up. So I sort of captured this phrase, leader meant, and because that captures both leadership and management, regardless of what the level you are in your organisation, or indeed your role, or whether you're even a team member, you all play your part, both in taking forward management, but also the leadership within that. We're in a different space, a different time, a different age. So, what skills do you think are important? So, the current research, thank you, Copilot, adds 10 top skills, they say, for an effective leader. Now, I would also add digital skills and critical thinking, so I'm not quite sure why that's not on the list, but nevertheless, let's just share those with you, and then we'll move on into some other thinking. So emotional intelligence, understanding and managing self, and recognising and influencing the emotions of others is crucial to effective leadership. Communication, of course, clear, concise communication. Listening, I think, is critically important. Active listening and showing that you are listening also forms a key part in leading others. And making sure that you understand and have empathy for where others are coming from. Adaptability, the ability to adapt and flex, critically important in a very changing and fast-moving world, particularly with the geopolitical influences that are coming through at the moment. Decision-making, and that I believe is a cognitive ability, along with sort of scanning the horizon, spotting trends, forming judgments about where the influences lie and what is the best course of action. And although it's not often mentioned in the emotional intelligence research that was originally undertaken by Goldman and Boyatzis, actually there were two other factors in addition to the what we might call softer skills, which are the hard skills, of course, the interpersonal skills, and that was being able to scan horizon, spot trends and patterns, and be able to form judgments from those abilities. So in many respects, that is a cognitive ability, which actually can be seriously enhanced now by generative AI. We're also looking at strategic thinking, being able to look above what is happening in your organisation, to be able to plot and understand what influences there are, to be able to then form sound judgments. I call it global, so it's looking at global, but also looking about how that might impact on local. Conflict resolution, lots of that, but being able to negotiate and find a path through is a really key skill to being an effective leader. And we have here delegation, of course. You might also have experiences. Delegation is not dumping on someone else. And, there is an art to delegating so others feel they're engaged. I like to call it co-production or co-creation on issues. Or sometimes, of course, you have to be able to be quite clear on a task in order to delegate effectively. So it depends on your positioning and a strategic vision about where you are in the situation as to whether that delegation needs to be more direct or whether you can take individuals with you through co-creation. And we've got empathy. I'm surprised empathy is at the lower end of this list, I have to say, but there we go. But understanding empathy, being able to walk in someone else's shoes, understanding different issues, cultural issues. We cannot possibly walk in the footsteps of others, but we can try and empathise with those individuals as we take them through into what needs to be delivered. Innovation, interestingly enough, from our research that we've been doing over the probably 10 years or so now on stepping up, innovation is always rated reasonably low when participants join that, and maybe it's because individuals don't have the opportunity to be innovative within the constraints of their role or their workplace. However, at the end of our programme, we see a huge lift in innovation, and that is because I think they have time to think, reflect, and to be able to co-create with others, to look at the art of the possible. So although lower down on this list, that will become an increasingly important skill in leadership as we move forward to in what is a very uncertain time. And then we've got time management, and that's a good old skill that is much needed. And how can you possibly prioritise or time management, or sometimes you think about things. And here we come back to whether you're neurodiverse. I'm dyslexic, but if you're anywhere on that spectrum, you might overthink things. So if you're a leader, then you need to consider that, not only for yourself about how you manage with your learning styles, but also for your team members or your peers who may also like to consider how to manage their time with the pressures. Therefore, it is quite a key skill to being effective, but everyone will be different and everyone will be unique. And in your role as leader, you may well have to help or support or coach individuals to manage their priorities in a way that chimes with them. So we move on to emotional intelligence, which we've just made reference to. And for me, I find this interesting that it stood the test of time, came out in the 80s, but still seems fresh today. And it's as if the whole concept of having managing your own emotions, self and others, to be able to, hold true to your anchor values, to be able to understand when you're under pressure, to feel, if you like, the cortisol running around your body if you're under stress and pressure, and how you make decisions when you may be feeling under pressure or under attack, and how you recognise that in others and help and support and have empathy. for me, it's about inclusive leadership, but it's also has stood the test of time. And there are other really fancy biological and MRI scans, neuroscience has taken that on for one step further. But at the moment, we're not going to explore that just yet. That's the subject of another module. But let's just look at empathy and emotional intelligence as being a critical skill set for effective leadership. I try and sort of give different versions of the same message about what is a key subject, because I know everyone learns slightly differently. Now, I like pictures, right, and something easy, but other people say, oh, I don't really like that. I prefer something clearer and text. So you'll see as we go through this module that I've used a variety of ways to actually tell the same story. So from the research then, and this is quite nicely calculated, emotional intelligence are social skills, being able to create and maintain healthy relationships with others, self-awareness, the knowledge of one's own thoughts, feelings, and motivations, understanding yourself. And in stepping up, you know that we focus at the beginning of your learning journey on know yourself. And that is why the self-regulation, well, I've just made reference to that, the ability to manage your emotions and actions in a variety of environments, and to understand when your physical signs are showing that you need to manage those emotions, and how you manage that, which has been part of, if you like, mindfulness, well-being. So take a break, meditate. If you feel your blood pressure is rising or you're feeling emotionally under pressure, you also look at the strategies to manage that. Empathy, we've just made reference to that, but the capacity to empathise and appreciate others' perspective in a diverse world, then that is critical. Decision making, again, the ability to make responsible choices and decisions regardless of the pressure that you're under. And so that cluster, which are known as the emotional intelligence cluster, the social elements, if you like, is the key to emotional intelligence. And I think possibly because it's very human focused and doesn't actually, it's not a one profession, it's everyone, everywhere, anytime. That's why EI, as it's often known, stands true to this day. Here is the text format of emotional intelligence, in case you don't get the pictures, but it more or less says what we've just been going through, but in a sort of more text-based way, and again derived from Goleman and Boyatzis. The other thing that perhaps wasn't in the sort of circle was about motivation, so not being driven for the sake of achievement, but having a passion for work that goes beyond money or status. Now, not everyone is able to do that, right? But understanding what motivates you as part of emotional intelligence is critical, and being able to understand how that is your driver, and everyone will be different because everyone is unique. But certainly the research is showing it leads to better relationships, better performance, more professional success, and really, I think the research also pointed out that it didn't matter what your professional background or your academic status. If you were focusing on developing, honing these core critical skills, then you'll be successful, and they're shown that there's greater performance. And it isn't necessarily, there's a lot of things, is it EQ or IQ? Well, you can have huge IQ, but if you don't have those social skills, those core emotional intelligence skills, then you're not going to be as successful as if you can engage with others, take others with you. So that is both emotional intelligence in a visual format, but here it is on text format. We're going to sort of just look now at more recent and emerging leadership theories. And here is one that I quite like the phrase, leaders eat last. And why does that capture? Well, it captures the fact that actually that those who are, probably they call it followers, but those who may be working with other leaders, the leader does not necessarily take precedence over others, and probably coined from a military background where the, if you like, the most senior leader eats with their staff. And that is quite an interest. Now that sort of turned the pyramid on its head. You see the little diagram there, where actually instead of it being, leaders at the top, it is actually those who work in the organisation, who deliver the services and products, who are the most important. So leaders are there to serve those who are delivering what is the nature of whatever the business is. And Simon Sinek coined the leaders eat last, and a servant leadership, which is also based on this model, was created by Robert R. Greenleaf. So those two seek to, if you like, support the democratization of the workforce in order to ensure that there is motivation, that there is greater engagement, understanding of the challenges faced for those who have to deliver, whatever the business is, and that the leaders therefore understand those pressures and can help and support to enable, to empower, to engage. So, all right, we've been looking at effective versus inclusive leadership. So we started off by saying you're on a journey to inclusive leadership, and we looked firstly about what makes an effective leader. So, all right, okay, so what's the difference with being an inclusive leader then? So inclusive leaders, on the other hand, focus on creating an environment where all team members feel they are respected and included, and they actively seek out and consider diverse perspectives and foster a culture of belonging. And I would call it creating a climate, or curating a climate that fosters inclusion, where difference can flourish. The critical competencies of looking at an inclusive leadership that sort of sit on top of being an effective leader are cultural competence, understanding and appreciating cultural differeces, equity, ensuring the treatment and opportunities and resources for all team members, that there's equity there, and collaboration, encouraging diverse viewpoints, co-creation, and really engaging others in a way that everyone feels empowered. Empathy, again, we're back on the empathy, being attuned to the experiences of others and of diverse team members, and championing diversity, the advocacy that inclusion matters. Of course, you can be an effective leader and an inclusive leader, but what we're seeking is that inclusive leaders include these capabilities, these approaches, the way in which you are inclusive in the way you are part of it. And here we're looking, of course, at leadership not being just at the top of organisation, but in that distributed model. So wherever you are inclusive in the way you're both effective, but you build on an additional set of inclusive competencies. And here I quite like this slide. I told you I like visual pictures. And together we rise. So a couple of points both from me and Richard Boyatzis. So a leader is not just about pushing or controlling others to meet a desired outcome. It's empowering others to be their best self through motivation, empathy, and engagement. Leadership, then, is an emotional art. We've got Richard Boyatzis' video here. I'm not sure whether it will work as we go through online, but let's give it a go. If not, I would suggest to our learners with us today on this module to just click the link on the learning platform. But let's see if we can hear from Richard.
The current status of neuroscience, and especially social neuroscience, and the current capabilities, at least for the past 15 years of fMRI technology, have enabled us to understand how neural functioning affects our behavior at a level we didn't before. So, for example, one of my colleagues, Professor Tony Jack, had a paper that just came out in Neuroimage showing that when you give people analytic problems, financial, those kinds of things, where you're analyzing it, you activate a part of the brain that's heavily in the executive function called the task-positive network to neuroscientists. He also showed that when you give people social problems, someone crying, someone asking for help, someone asking somebody else out on a date, that you activate a different network. He calls it the social network. It was a subset of the default mode network. It's in a different part of the brain. What Tony showed is that these two networks have almost no overlap, but people had known that before. What Tony's data made very clear is that when you activate the task-positive network, you suppress the social network, and vice versa. So every time we take people who are in business, every time we take MBA students and say, we're going to teach you accounting, we're going to teach you finance, we're going to teach you economics, we're going to teach you operations, we're going to teach you strategy by studying cases, we're going to teach you leadership by studying case studies of leadership, the only thing we're doing is activating the task-positive network. So most people in MBA programs graduate with deficiencies in the social realm. They know how to analyze the hell out of things going on in the organization, but they don't know how to do anything. And what's worse is, because the task-positive network closes you down, they don't even notice the people around them. Now, to be effective in any leadership role, you have to be able to solve problems, and you have to be able to deal with people. You have to be able to focus, and you have to be able to be open to new ideas. We think the most effective leaders cycle back and forth between these networks in under a second. We also know that in this default mode network, where you're more open to people, you're more open to new ideas, you're more creative, that's where you can think outside the box. Unfortunately, we need to focus to solve problems, but every time we focus, we eliminate information. We close down. In that sense. Well, a person needs to do that at times, but if they don't scan the environment, if they're not open to other people, and we have the other dimension, which is an important aspect of the value-based leadership doctoral program here at Benedictine, is that being open to moral concerns is a part of this default mode network. Not moralizing, not the thumping on a biblical text talking about what's right and wrong, but the issue of thinking about whether or not it's fair, thinking about whether or not it's just. That is moral concern that goes along with empathic concern.
Thank you, Richard. Really well articulated, and we do recommend that you actually look on YouTube, and we'll have some on our learning platform. Just short, bite-sized, really pithy but insightful videos, and it's part of learning how we really take our leadership, and I'm talking inclusive leadership, to the next level. So I'm just going to ping back the slide there. It's having a moment. But I wanted to talk to you about, we're coming up for the time when it's part of your learning to be able to reflect and move forward. So I will just ask you to take some time at this break end to review and reflect. So we're going to ask you to do a couple of things, and we will take you back after this short break, where you can sort of have a cup of tea or coffee or stretch and do that before we move into the reflection space. Welcome back from your reflection time, and here we go into the part 2, where we try and capture the key elements from the earlier part of our discussion, both with us, of course, with me, and with Richard Boyatzis, adding some greater depth, therefore, into our thinking processes and the most emerging research on neuroscience, which, well, for me, of course, I find it fascinating. But it's about taking, if you like, the whole science of leadership just one step further. So, our learners here with us today, you will have, or you're going to be, completing your self-assessment, which is aligned to leadership capabilities. So if you look at the wheel in front of you, you will see that it actually mirrors the key effective leadership competences that we shared, how to be an effective leader at any level, but also some of the management component parts, but very much derived from emotional intelligence research and turned into a self-assessment questionnaire, which helps you mark your progress, really, about your leadership journey, and more importantly, your journey to becoming an inclusive leader. Here you will see self-awareness, motivation, how you establish rapport, empowering, communicating, diversity, influence, political awareness, judgment, innovation, and learning. And the key things we talked earlier about how we suddenly see a big shoot up in innovation, which is actually critical, but understanding what your motivation is. So just to share with you what we call the wheel looks like. So you can see the blue wheel in the blue line going around the wheel in the middle is where individuals across all cohorts have, it's an average, have worked out where they are at the beginning of stepping up leadership journey. And then there's a midline at the midpoint, and the green line is at the back. And you can see quite large shifts in self-awareness. So you're going up almost to 100%. So you're shifting from here, we got 70 to around about 95%. On average, uplift in self-awareness, a critical emotional intelligence capability. Motivation, again, because you've refreshed, realigned, refocused, and understood the core values that are motivating you. Establishing rapport, again, an emotional intelligence key skill that honing that, so understanding others' viewpoints is all part of that inclusive leadership. Empathy, well, probably for us in Stepping Up, most people would say are signed up because they have a passion for empowerment and empathy. So we would be expecting those to join us to be reasonably assessing them quite so highly in that. And empowering being the same. Communicating, again, it is a shift of probably about 10%, but that is based on an average, and diversity as we would expect. There's not much shift in it, but sometimes there is a realignment of what that means. And one of our participants quite said, I really thought I was a really good, effective leader, but a bit like Boyatzis would say, but I realise now I focus so much on the task, I haven't thought about the people. And perhaps I hadn't taken into account the cultural differences. And that's the difference in becoming an effective leader, but becoming an inclusive leader. Understanding how you make decisions, particularly how you make decisions under pressure, is part of that next shift that we see when we look around at political awareness, influence and judgment. And that really starts to hone. We've talked about it being a cognitive capability, but it's a sense making. It's also understanding your internal mechanisms about how you make decisions under pressure, how you think more carefully about the decision-making process so that you co-create, you take others with you. And looking at your judgment, and that's part of how you look at that if you're leading change, particularly. What are the internal factors? What are the blocks? What are the ideas? How can you take others with you? What is your judgment? And that requires a more considered approach to making decisions. So, Len, as we ask you now to complete another self-assessment, which looks at emotional intelligence and inclusive leadership questionnaire, and you sort of rate yourself, on a continuum about that. But this is all about honing that self-insight, and certainly builds on the Know Yourself module. And at this point, we would like you to self-reflect, to complete the questionnaire, but not just complete it, and say, "Oh, I've done it," but it's to self-reflect and share with others what have I learned, and to actively get feedback on your leadership styles, and to take advice and from others, get a bit of feedback. It's something you can do if your organisation has a personal development plan or performance review. You can use those insights in transferring back to the workplace, but also to give more depth, I call it breadth and depth, to your thinking processes about how you engage and relate, what your true inclusive leadership style is, and to get some feedback. So we also like it if you could, everyone learns in slightly different ways, and that reflection. First of all, we like to encourage you to reflect by yourself and then to share with others. It doesn't have to be, your peers on the programme. It can be individuals at work, it can be your family. Often they give you interesting feedback. So, how get them to give some idea, because it is, as you take on board others' views, so you can then hone your self-insight, because it helps. And particularly if you've got, I call it the inner voice that's saying, "Oh, you're really worthy," that understanding, that reinforcement, that affirmation means that you are able then to take a more balanced and sound view about, this is me, this is my best self, this is my core strength, these are my unique characteristics, this is what I want from life, this is how I value it, this is what others think about me. And your external mentor is one that helps you really, I think, form judgments, more attuned judgments on your leadership skills, your inclusive leadership skills, and what steps you'll need to take as you move forward into the next step in your career. Thank you for being with us on this leadership module. You can refer to it time again, but it forms part of honing your inclusive leadership skills. I shall leave you for now, and I'll catch up with you on the next module. Bye for now.